Thank you, George. Thank you for that introduction. And I hope indeed it is fantastic. I hope you find today's session very useful in your roles. So I'm Carol, and I'm going to start today's presentation, and then I'm going to hand over to Kelly, and then Kelly's going to pass back to me, and I'll finish off today's session. So we've got quite a few slides to work through, and we've got some activities for you. So here's just a little summary of today's session. We're going to start off with a little polling activity, find out a little bit about who you are, what your roles are, and then I'm going to introduce solution-focused thinking. We're going to share with you some tools, why use solution-focused tools, give you some examples of those, and then we would like to finish off with giving you some news about other webinars and modules that you can complete as part of your continuing professional development, and in particular be very useful for people in a needs assessment role. But as I say, there's going to be quite a few activities, sharing of resources, so we're going to be getting you to use the chat box as well. So please don't hesitate, if there is a question that you do have, pop that into the chat box for us. Okay, so let's get started with our first polling activity. So we'll just get George just to bring that up. Okay, so there's some responses coming in then. Just giving you all a chance just to complete that poll. You might actually have multiple roles, so that's absolutely fine just to select more than one. And of course, if you do have a role that's not stated there on the poll, then please type that into the chat box. Okay, George, I'm afraid I can't actually see it. Kelly, actually, if you could summarise it via the microphone, that would be really helpful, because at the moment I'm a bit blind actually. I can't see anything.
I wasn't supposed to be jumping in quite so soon. But yeah, it's a really interesting response actually. The largest group among you, which coming in at 85% of you, would consider yourselves as being in a role where you support students. Then the next largest group is folks who coordinate support for students. And then after that, it's people who are needs assessor at 59%. So that's the largest kind of group. We've actually got 0 teaching staff on the in the cohort today. But we've got a couple of assistive technology officers and 5 others, so we'll find out in the chat box what those might be.
Yeah, okay. Really helpful then. So in the chat box, yeah, if there's 5 others, that'd be really helpful just to find out what your roles are. That's really helpful actually, because obviously this whole webinar is gauged towards you in those particular roles. That's really interesting. And a few names I recognise there as well, so yep, that's brilliant. So we have we demonstrate assistive software and technology, so that's excellent. And Tanya, you're a student advisor, so I'm assuming, Tanya, you maybe have a role where you're advising students on things like funding as well as courses, that type of hardship funds, that type of thing. I'm just thinking about my previous role in a previous life as a student advisor. And Vary, as well as being an ILO, Inclusive Learning Officer, we provide safeguarding as well, so really good mixture here. Now, George, I do have another polling activity. It's polling 2, so chances are Kelly might have to vocalise the responses to that poll, but if I can just get you just to bring up the second poll. And I can see it this time. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, George. So this next polling activity asks, have you attended or completed any of the following? Now, I do already recognise some names, but I just think it's quite helpful just to sort of share who within the group has already completed some professional development with us. So we have a huge number of you who have either attended or completed. You might be attending VPhils and finishing off with VPhils, or have completed it altogether. So that's really good. And I'll explain to those of you who haven't got a clue what VPhils or VNAP means, actually what that course is. It's part of a PDA inclusiveness, and I'll explain more about that at the end of today's webinar. That's really good. Quite a few of you have already attended Kelly's motivational interviewing webinar, which is excellent, and you're back here again today. I'll share with you at the end of the webinar about the credits that you get for attending the webinars as part of your inclusive practitioner. The effective needs assessment webinar got good 44%, so that was one I delivered a good few weeks ago. And there's a few of you who actually have attended the sensory support event, which was hugely successful. What's interesting here, I think probably Kelly, for you as well, not everybody actually attending today's webinar is maybe even aware that those two modules are available as part of the inclusive practitioner, and I would love to be able to share more information about that towards the end of the webinar. Very much relevant to you in your roles in both supporting students, coordinating support, and also being involved in the assistive technology side of things. So we'll give you more information about that later. So I'm just going to get George just to whip me back to the main presentation, and we've got our chat box back there as well, so if anybody does have any comments or questions, please feel free to pop those in there. Right. I am going to stick with this page. We're not going to be moving anywhere just yet. And I would like to ask you a question about your perception about what solution-focused thinking means. So, at the moment, what's your perception of what that might mean if you were sat with a student, later on today? Might already have used the technique in the past, but what would that mean to you in your role? If you can just share some of your comments with me in the chat box, and I'll read those out. Just giving you all a chance just to do that. I think it's quite interesting actually. There's lots of different definitions out there. What's your perception? There's no right or wrong answer here either. It's really just your own opinion. That gives me a chance just to get a quick drink. That's really good, Carol. Really like that description there. Thinking of solutions that will work to help the student overcome their personal barriers to studying. Jane, it's about finding a solution rather than a problem, so focusing on moving forward, Jane. And I'm conscious, Jane, to not call you Joyce, because we talked about this the other day as well, because it's Jane Boyce. Sometimes I call you Joyce, but we've got it right today. Karen, if a student identifies a problem, difficulty, working out a way to overcome this. So very much focusing on the solution. Emma, for you, it's about working with a student to develop workable, usable, relevant, beneficial solutions to meet their needs. Beth, it's about finding the best solution to meet the student's individual needs. And Rose, it's about finding a solution by using the student's strengths, like that, because that's very much in keeping with today's presentation. Yolanda, it's about how we reach best results for the student. Very much student-centred, isn't it? Stephen, I'm just going to read, Stephen's out here, problem solving, but finding solutions that are adaptable as well. Terry, finding solutions to student barriers. Jo, thinking about tools can have, thinking about what tools can or have been used in the past to help support students fulfil their potential. Very much in keeping, Jo, with today's webinar, and Kelly and I will be sharing some examples of those with the whole group. And while it's about working with students to enable them to overcome their difficulties, all really, really good examples, and really refreshing actually just to see how student-centred they are as well. Tanya, you're maybe not entirely sure, but it is about agreeing with the student the best way forward to overcome barriers. So hopefully, given these really excellent opinions that you have about solution-focused thinking just now, hopefully you'll find some of the tools that Kelly and I share with you today as useful as a means of supporting your students to overcome, which for many students are barriers which have maybe existed all of their adult lives. They've maybe had a really negative experience in the past and they have never had an opportunity to sit down with somebody using a solution-focused technique in helping them to move forward. So thank you to everybody for opinions on that. I'm just going to move on to this next slide and just give you a little bit of background here. So Steve DeShazer was born back in 1940. Now, he was widely recognised as as the author of the first book in solution-focused brief therapy, but also recognised as a pioneer in the field of family therapy and as a primary developer of what has become internationally recognised as solution-focused brief therapy. Now, he sometimes was addressed as the grand old man of family therapy when lecturing in conferences in his later years. And actually, having watched some research videos, he does actually come across as somebody who you would imagine as a grandfather, very calm, very thought that came across in the videos. Solution-focused practice concentrates on everything that is already being done that's moving or has the potential to move in the right direction for the person's sort of preferred future, what it is they're trying to achieve, what their goals are. And motivation comes from focusing on doing what works rather than dwelling on what doesn't. And in effect, it raises awareness of relative success and encourages the lessons of progress to be learnt as you use this technique. So I'm just going to share with you a slide here which has a definition. There's lots of them out there, but here's one on the slide which I'll read out. Using solution-focused thinking, problems are acknowledged. However, the assumption is that it is the problem which is the problem, not the person. The aim is to validate the view that the person has a problem rather than the idea that the person is the problem. So, there is a basic and sort of profoundly simple premise to solution focus that if what you are doing works, do more of it. And so with my needs assessor hat on, or when I was a student advisor, or when I was giving careers guidance, what I tended to do was try and find out what it was that the student was doing that actually worked. Little things that perhaps maybe they had been doing for so long, they maybe took for granted and had kind of forgot that they did it, but it worked for them. It's about identifying that, getting them to do more of it. And if they're doing things that are not working for them, those are the things that we need to do differently. The assumption is that the seeds for positive change lie in the individual who might need your help to engage their sort of personal resources. But in essence, solution-focused thinking is about moving forward. And small change can bring about greater improvements in time and across different settings. So it's small incremental steps. And and really those can become much larger and impact greatly on that individual in the future. Using solution-focused thinking, they're acknowledged. We're not trying to ignore that they exist. However, the assumption is that it is the problem, as I say in this slide, which is the problem, and getting the person to see that as well, because it could be that the student has been told that, you have a problem, and the student believes quite firmly that they are the problem. So the aim is to validate the view that the person has a problem rather than the idea that the person is the problem. And often a person can be quite pessimistic about the possibility of change. And actually, some people just feel they're no longer able to imagine life without the problem. So when you ask a student to describe a problem-free future, it's really helpful to suggest the idea that there will be a time when the problem is solved. The very act of describing the solution actually seems to make it much more achievable to that person. And this can actually take the form of what they call a projection into the future, when the problem has ceased to exist. And this new context can be explored. Now, this technique is called the miracle question. And the miracle question, or problem is gone question, is a method of questioning that invites the student to envisage and gets them to describe in detail how the future will be different when the problem is no longer present. Now, keep the miracle question in your mind just now, because I'm going to share with you part of a video. There's 3 parts to it. We don't have enough time today to show you all 3 parts, so I'm just going to show you the first part, which is a couple of minutes long. You don't need to do anything, just watch and listen, and then we'll come back to the main classroom and we'll continue with it.
The miracle question created by Steve DeShazer is an innovative way to devise therapeutic goals and a core part of solution-focused therapy. When using the miracle question, you're basically asking people to imagine that their life has already dramatically changed for the better. So instead of focusing on how intractable their problem is and how difficult life is because of it, the miracle question focuses their attention on what will happen after the problem is dealt with, focusing on the desired future rather than the undesired present. It jumps right over the mechanics of how exactly the problem will be solved and into the mechanics of how they will live when it is solved. It's a neat way to bypass rigid constraints, black and white thinking, and otherwise unshakable beliefs that things can't possibly change. Here's our first example.
If by some magic a miracle occurred tonight as you were sleeping, and you woke up in the morning and you no longer had any urge to obsessively vacuum, what would your day be like?
Well, the first thing is I would wake up and realise I didn't have a huge, horrible knot of fear in my stomach.
Okay, so here the client has put their answer in negative terms, but they have nonetheless given Mark valuable information about what they have been experiencing and what they want to change. This gives him another marker against which to measure future progress, them waking up feeling more positive and calm. But sometimes you need to carefully tailor the miracle question to fit the circumstances of the client. For example, if people are grieving the passing of a loved one or are living with cancer, asking them about a miracle might elicit responses like, "Well, my husband would still be alive then, wouldn't he?" Or, "This cancer would never have happened." The miracle question might not be such a great tactic in such circumstances. Instead, you could ask simply, what will be a sign that you're feeling better in the days to come? However, if someone's depressed and miserable because of the way they're living, then you can throw caution to the winds.
Okay, so if by some magic a wonderful miracle occurred tonight as you were sleeping, what would be different tomorrow in your life?
I'd be happier. I'd spend more time with my friends. I'd be more active. I'd have a better job. I would go back to doing sport, dancing, all the things I love.
Okay.
Here, Mark got his client to think about what will be different after the miracle. The client has given a clue to real desired outcomes that can begin to form the basis of therapeutic goals. But you can go much further with the miracle question by helping your clients respond more creatively to it. You want people to feel the answer to the miracle question, to experience it and not just to think about it. This helps make the imagined.
So anyway, listen, the video is in 3 sections, and you'll be provided with the link to the whole video if you want to watch that later on. But it's just 3 very good examples of the miracle question and how that is used in context with 3 different individuals. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I am now going to, I think, pass over to Kelly, and Kelly's going to take you through the next 8 or 10 slides here, and then it will come back to me, and then we'll summarise and finish up for the day. So pass over to you now, Kelly.
Hi, thanks, Carol. That was a really good example of the miracle question, and what I liked as well is that you'll notice in the text that was coming up there, they were kind of talking as well about circumstances where you might not want to use it, and I'll kind of revisit that a little bit when we look at examples of solution-focused questioning. But just before we start that, I thought I'd just maybe emphasise why use a solution-focused approach. I think we're all kind of, I mean, you probably wouldn't be attending the webinar if you didn't think it was probably a good idea. But I thought it's useful just to take a couple of minutes just to explore the usefulness of it, and best practice when you're using it. Carol mentioned earlier how pleased she was that there was such an emphasis on a student-centred approach in a lot of your responses, and I think that's very key here, is that we acknowledge that the student will be the expert in his or her unique experiences, because for all we learn about things that might work for people with different types of barriers to learning, everybody's experience is going to be different, and it's respectful and useful to acknowledge that and to look for expert advice from the student themselves. It also provides an opportunity for the student to talk about themselves without being defined by what's seen as their problems, because especially perhaps if they've got perhaps a physical disability, they probably spend a lot of time with medical practitioners or other people, often talking a lot about their physical difficulties that they experience, and we're all much more than that. It's a good opportunity for them to talk about their strengths, their goals, their ambitions, what they're good at, and really be seen as a complete individual and not defined by their problems. It's also very congruent with the social model of disability, which a lot of you might be familiar with, which is the idea that the problem, as Carol was mentioning earlier, is not within the person. People are disabled by their environments and by the attitudes of other people. So again, it fits nicely with that. It's individualised and it's realistic as well. And as Carol mentioned earlier, it's about working out what works. I mean, it seems incredibly sensible and practical to look at what's working and do more of it. Okay, so some of the benefits is that solution-focused work, it reduces things like, you might have come across it, learned helplessness, conditioned dependency. That's where someone has a feeling of hopelessness, often due to perhaps experiences of failure in the past, or with conditioned dependency of other people always doing stuff for them and having low expectations as well. Where they've not been fully understood or appreciated for actually being able to do more than has been assumed. It also reduces the likelihood of imposing the wrong support strategies. There might be a strategy that you think, oh, that's a really good idea, but it might not be right for that person. And that's where technology abandonment comes in, which, if you've heard me talk before, especially in motivational interviewing, it's something I kind of feel really strongly about, because it's such a waste of opportunity and resources to give people stuff that they end up not even using. and often it's because it was the wrong thing for them, or they weren't ready to use it, or they needed more training. So it promotes self-understanding and understanding by others, which I think is actually really key when we're talking about inclusiveness. To me, there's a lot of different definitions of it, but to me it's often a sense of belonging and of being understood, and I think those are very key human needs in order to feel motivated and empowered. And I've got a little quote here about what solution-focused work is, and it's about watering the flowers, not the weeds. So it's finding what's working, what's positive, and not spending too much time on going over problems. And you might find that people get almost stuck in a story, and you realise that they're telling the story over and over again, all about the difficulties they have, and it's kind of breaking that pattern. However, having said that, it is about finding a balance. And as was brought up in the example of the miracle question about sometimes it might not be the right question, is that it's really important to be mindful that people might be living with, especially a health condition, that to them really is a problem, that is a source of pain and fatigue. They might feel grief and an ongoing sense of loss, and that has to be respected and acknowledged. This isn't about kind of glossing over things and saying, well, it doesn't matter, we can carry on. We have to have a very real understanding of that person's experience. And we also got to accept that people do experience discrimination and societal barriers, that we can do as much as we can in an educational environment to address those, but there are challenges people are experiencing within the wider world. It's also important to adjust to match the student's communication style as well. Now I've put a bit there, you might need to adjust for adolescents, because obviously a lot of people transitioning, especially into college, it might be quite young, maybe around about 16, and they're still very much in the adolescent phase of their life of cognitive development, and they do have a different way of communicating where they actually will appreciate directness, and also nobody can smell inauthenticity like a teenager. So there's a lot of talk about giving people positive feedback and appreciating their strengths and things. That really has to be done very genuinely, and it needs to be really felt by you, because teenagers will know when they're being kind of sort of patronised or whatever. They're very self-conscious and very keen on that. If there's something you're interested in looking more at, well, Carol will be mentioning later some of the other self-study modules that are available in the Inclusive Practitioner programme. One of them is called Promoting Positive Behaviour in the Classroom, and there's actually a whole section on adolescence and the psychology of adolescence, and why teenagers are kind of different and need to be communicated with in a different way and understood differently. So that might be something you might want to dip into. You don't actually have to do the whole course, you can just dip into it, but if you want the certificate, you do the full thing. Okay, so that was just about, just finding a balance and so that people do feel that they're being understood, and not just, told to kind of focus on the positive all the time if there's something they really want to talk about. Okay, so we've had an example already of solution-focused questioning. So what you're looking to do with your questions when you're finding out about a person is you're looking to elicit evidence of their strengths, their qualities and their skills. You might remember, I think around half of you watched the webinar on motivational interviewing. That's very much what that's about as well, and that there's more examples came with that webinar, so if you didn't see that one, you can always go back and look at the recording. A good idea is to break down the demands of their course into specific tasks and really look at finding solutions for tasks themselves. Again, that is not, it's taking things away from the person having a problem to actually looking at the task and how that will be solved. And also thinking about things like assistive technology, presenting them as productivity tools rather than, something that disabled people get. It's a different way of talking about things. Ask about when things worked well for them in other situations, like at school, or in other situations they found themselves. and really get specific and investigate exactly what happened so that you can draw on that as a useful resource. Also, be giving the student feedback on their strengths, their achievements and goals, good ideas that they have. You often find when you give that back to the student, it actually elicits more of that kind of information. And what we also need to be looking at is very specific next steps as well. Again, that breaking down to specifics of tasks, what to do next, what to look at, what to try. So some examples might be, tell me about times when you have coped well. What's different about those times? Tell me about what worked in the past. And if someone has had support before, ask about the person who provided support, and if it was good support, why was that? What exactly did they do? You can also look at skills that students use in other areas of their life that could be useful here. This might be particularly useful for adult returners. We're going to look at a way to kind of generate that information in a moment with a values and goals activity, which is quite good for people who, don't automatically have that information at their fingertips. We're very, especially I think, maybe not just British, but even sort of prolific Scots are even worse at finding opportunities to celebrate their strengths. We're so modest and almost kind of comfortable with failure. So, people sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable about talking about their strengths. So we'll look at wee activity that can get people talking about that. Another thing to look at is think of yourself as someone who shares information rather than gives advice. Because that can sometimes lead to what's known as, in motivational interviewing, as the writing reflex, which is we know what we think would work for someone, and so we tell them, and then that person sort of feels almost pressurised to kind of go along with it when it might not be the right thing for them. So rather than telling people straight up what you think they need, offer your suggestions in a more collaborative way. And you can sometimes even use the example of other students. You could be, some students find it useful to use this type of technology. They found it quite useful. Is that something you'd like to try? And then see, sort of test the water a bit. Or you could be, from what you've said, and again, be specific about what the person has said and the difficulties they've experienced. Say, I've got some software here you might find interesting. Would you like to spend some time now looking at it and then tell me what you think? So it's very collaborative and respectful. So I mentioned just there, identifying transferable skills. Now, at the end of the session, you'll be able to download some resources which contain information about what's called values, personal values and goals, card sorting activities. They're often quite paper-based, but there's no reason why you can't, pop these into a Word document and do it digitally, which obviously is more accessible for people. But what these are is they're a quick and easy way to find out more about a person's skills and priorities. And it's good for people who don't feel comfortable with talking about themselves or appearing to, praise themselves or big themselves up. It can be very revealing, even to yourself. When I first came across it, I kind of thought, oh God, this looks like a bit boring and a bit, dull. I did it and I was quite surprised at the kind of things that came out. You can create your own, which are tailored more to the needs of your students, or you can download existing ones and just maybe customise them. So I'll talk a bit more about that, about how to do that. These are the ones that you can download from this session. Now the first one, W.R. Miller, is Bill Miller, who is one of the co-founders of motivational interviewing. So it's very congruent with that approach, if that's something that you're kind of into. And then Intensifying and Igniting Change Talk is an academic article, but it's got quite a few examples of the kind of lists you can create for making up your own values and goals activities. And there should be a picture in the next one. As you can see, very non-technical. I just fired these down on my kitchen table. Basically, you get a load of cards, and it will be sheets that you can print off and cut up, and you create 3 columns. So very important to me, and not important to me. And people spend, 10 to 15 minutes sometimes. If you've got the time, they can just do it themselves, and they can sit and just pop these down. And then you come together afterwards and can have a look at how the things that are important to someone, how that might guide you in finding a solution. So there might be things like autonomy. So this is really tiny there. Like autonomy might be something that someone says is very important to me. So then you'd be like, okay, so you need to feel in control. You need to be the one who's managing this. So therefore, let's look at building and training to get you up and running and really independent with your technology. Really look at putting the person in control of how support is delivered. And there's lots of other things there as well. Like people might say they really like to be alone. So you can look at things like ways to explore things that they can do independently. So there's all sorts of things in there. There's absolutely tons. I think I'm trying to remember how many cards are in that particular card sort. I think it goes up to about 70. You can take out ones that you think are maybe not appropriate, and you can make your own, which has maybe language that's more appropriate for like younger people and stuff, because some of it is maybe a bit kind of hippie is the word I might use. Bill Miller is the kind of Californian contingent of motivational interviewing, and it does come from a bit more of a sort of spiritual kind of background. So that's something you can try. You can download those at the end. And, oh my goodness, we're on to scaling, and this is Carol's going to take over now and talk about using scaling, and then kind of carry on talking about other professional development for the rest of the session. So I might jump back in at the end, but otherwise that's me done, and I'll hand over to Carol.
Thanks, Kelly. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. And I was having a wee look at the cards on your kitchen table, and then I saw a great big pile at the top. So that looks really interesting, actually. And again, I think fits in really nicely with different, individuals will have preferences about the way in which you are engaging with solution-focused type therapy, something that's a bit more kind of practical, kind of hands-on, something that's quite, there's those cards on your table there, those are quite nice because that's something that's kind of physical, sat at the table and you can work through with the students. So I really like that. Another example I'm just going to share with you is scaling, and I have mentioned scaling in the past, but it's a really flexible technique that can be used by an individual to identify movement in their problem or the challenges that they're facing, and it's just a really effective way of giving them a visual demonstration of the journey that they're making, and getting from A to B. It's especially helpful, I think, when a person is struggling to identify goals or even exceptions to their problem. This is just another really good flexible way of sort of taking them through small steps. I'm just going to share with you some examples of using scaling. So you might say something like, imagine a scale from 0 to 10. 10 represents how you want things to be when the problem is solved, and 0 is the opposite. What number are you on that scale right now? And often people identify with that an awful lot more. It's easier for them to use a scale to indicate where they are rather than trying to describe it, because they just might find that hugely difficult to do. How do they put how they're feeling into words? So scaling is a really flexible tool to use. You might ask another question about that same scale. What number were you at when the problem that you're experiencing was at its worst? And then asking them to identify, what will you notice if you moved up 1 or 2 numbers towards your goal? What would be different? And it really is a really good way to get the individual to start imagining and visualizing them coming up with a solution to that problem. If the person describes themselves as a very low number, you might ask questions like, so how do you cope when things are really difficult? And ask them, well, what do you do? Who's actually helping you to cope? Or you might ask, what is stopping you from moving down one number? So maybe they're at a 3. So, what, because they might come back with very little. Well, I'm not coping and nobody helps me to cope. But if they've got themselves at 3, what is it that's stopping them from moving further down that scale? It's just another really clever, flexible way of trying to sort of draw information out of that individual. So, as you can see, questions like these encourage the person to imagine change and to focus on their strengths and coping skills. And you can be as imaginative as you like with the scales and adapt them to suit the individual that you're actually working with. Some people might use the example I have here on the PowerPoint slide. They might use steps. Some people actually, it just depends on the person that you're working with. I've seen mind maps used as well. Visual representation used on the slides, just whatever suits that individual, whether it's colour coded, has pictures on it, whatever. I'm going to show you another resource. It was a goal setting worksheet, and again you'll have a link to this goal setting worksheet, but goals are something that are stated positively and in a way that progress can actually be noted. If a person, I had an example here, and funnily enough, actually, Kelly mentioned assistive technology earlier on as well, but I'm thinking out the box here about the numbers of students I've met with who are hugely frustrated because they don't feel that now they've got their tool, that they are independent and confident in using it. So I was thinking about, if I was using a goal setting worksheet, an example might be a student wants to build up their confidence in using assistive technology. So they might say, I want to use my LiveScribe pen to take notes independently. I will do this by attending the training that you've organised for me, and I will practice using the device at my next lecture. And that's instead of saying, I don't want to have a person note take for me on my behalf. I'm embarrassed about that. So hopefully you can see the sort of different style of language that's being used there. And I think also from our point of view, if you've got a goal setting worksheet, what you're going to do is you're going to review whether or not they've attended the training and have indeed used that piece of equipment and how they feel now. Do they feel more confident? I actually think the goal setting worksheet and the scaling work quite well together. Okay, so on to our next slide here, making it work. So in order to make it work, we're looking for previous solutions. So what we tend to find is that most people have previously solved problems, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to identify how they did that, help the person to see the potential solutions. So you might ask, what did you or others do that was helpful in the past? And and again, we've mentioned this, Kelly's mentioned this, find out what works, build upon that. Also using sort of present and future focused questions. Usually these are focused on the present or on the future, and this reflects the basic belief that problems are best solved by focusing on what is already working and how an individual would like their life to be, rather than focusing on the past and what isn't. And you can't change what's in the past. It's just another way of moving forward. So an example of a question might be, what will you be doing in the next week that would indicate to you and to others that you're actually making progress? And also using things like compliments, validating what individuals are already doing well, and acknowledging how difficult the problems are, encourages the person to change whilst giving the message that you are listening and that you do care. But the focus is on identifying those strengths, because they quite often can compensate for areas where they feel they're an awful lot less confident about. So you might actually ask a question like, how did you do that? Or invite the person to sort of almost self-compliment by virtue of answering the question. Quite often, if I'm sat there with my needs assessor hat, and this person's presented themselves to me, and they have achieved several qualifications at school, I want to know how they did that. Sometimes what comes out of that is they are a super organised person. There's all these little light bulbs that start going off, and you think, right, let's build on that. They might have a study technique which they have used in the past, and because they've used it in the past doesn't mean to say we can't build on that now and into the future. So I think as a needs assessor, we do need to use more of this type of technique to sort of draw out information from the students, engage what their strengths are. And finally, inviting the person to do more of what is working. So you might, I'm just trying to think here, might invite the person to do more of what has previously worked, or to try changes they have brought up which they would like to try. So it's more of an experiment. It's let's try this, and if it doesn't work, let's go back and look at it again. Quite often in our roles, we are reviewing how effective the support strategies or recommendations or the use of the equipment has been. I think that's hugely important as well. Let's try it and see. Okay, so I'm just mindful of the time. We've only got 5 minutes here left, and I just want to share with you all some professional learning news. So you have heard Kelly and I talk about the inclusive practitioner. This is a new development with CDN, and you will receive an email. Everybody who attends these webinars will receive an email, and you're totally entitled to claim what we call a one inclusive practitioner credit, and you can use that to contribute towards your inclusive practitioner status. So you will be contacted later on by CDN about that. There are lots of free online courses in the Inclusive Practitioner programme. There will be a link to our information leaflet about the Inclusive Practitioner. And also, I would ask you, for people who don't necessarily want to go and complete a full qualification, which I'm going to share with you shortly, they might just want to be part of the Inclusive Practitioner programme. Pass the information on to them, and they too can opt to complete short modules. There's a really good one there that Kelly's produced called Promoting Positive Behaviour in the Classroom. It gets you 6 inclusive practitioner credits. What we're looking for is to achieve 20, and then you get your inclusive practitioner status. So it's just a really flexible way to continue with your professional development. So please pass the message around your colleagues. It doesn't cost anything apart from your time, and you can dip in. Say, for example, you're only going partway through that module, and 10 minutes later you're called away. Everything you do is actually saved. It's all done online, and you can return to it later on. So we'll be able to give you more information about that. There's other courses in the pipeline, and that are all going to be part of this inclusive practitioner, and Kelly's working on that as well as myself. We'll be able to provide you with more details about that later on. And also we are setting up an assistive technology online portal, and these will be a series of webinars with lots of question and answers with expert practitioners and developers, and that's going to be launched in September of this year. And with that in mind, I'm going to have a poll which I'm going to share with you briefly, and just get your thoughts on what types of professional development you would be interested in. Poll 3, and that means you can all just sort of tick the different boxes. I'll need to get Kelly to vocalise the poll for me, because that's not showing in my screen right now. And the slide there that I never got a chance to say much about was the PDA inclusiveness. If anybody is interested in completing a qualification, that particular course introduces you to the whole concept of developing inclusive teaching and learning and support strategies for learners. And if you want more information about that, please contact me directly.
Okay, Carol, there's still some votes coming in here. This is kind of like election night or something. But overall, the most popular response at the moment is we've got 80% is people interested in assistive technology webinars. So hopefully people will be popping stuff in the chat box about any specific tools that they want to look at there. There's also quite a bit of interest, almost at 70%, in the inclusive practitioner as well. And we've got, sitting on sort of 30 to 40% people interested in PDA inclusiveness or tailored online sessions about inclusive teaching for staff. So I think the AT portal that you're discussing for September is going to be very much in demand.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Kelly. And I think, as we finish off here, you will be given links that will take you directly to information about the inclusive practitioner, of which the AT portal is part of. And as a matter of course, everybody who is part of that inclusive practitioner group will be informed about this sort of series of webinars that will be launched come September. So if you are able to provide information about any specific technology that you would like an assistive technology webinar about, please pop that into the chat box. We've had lots of really good suggestions already from people attending different courses which Kelly and I deliver on, and it's just really useful just to keep a bank of those to make sure that we're actually meeting a need out there. Thanks very much for that, Jo. Brain in hand. Funnily enough, somebody else has actually already asked for that, so that's really useful for Kelly and I, just to make a little note of that. If for example, you attend the AT webinars and you find them really useful, you can also provide information as well about, later on when you're evaluating the webinar, what other sessions you would be interested in, because it might be that you just can't think of anything today, but you might later on. So please don't hesitate to contact either myself or Kelly. Those are our email addresses there on the final slide. So if there's anything about today that you would like further information on, or even signposted to, please get in touch with us and we'll do our very, very best to point in the right direction. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along today. I hope you found today's session informative, and you feel it's something actually you can use in your various roles. I'll finish off now and I'll hand back to George.